Today I'm in an apartment that I look after for a friend, and the job today is to paint 2 bedrooms, and I don't want to be here all day, so I'm going to be spraying, but not with this. After 2 or 3 years of successfully using an HVLP sprayer, that's high velocity, low pressure, I've decided to upgrade to an airless sprayer. Now, I had a lot of comments after the last video of the HVLP saying, Stuart, you should be using an airless sprayer, it's so much better. Well, this one did me really well for fences and what have you for the last couple of years. But now I'm doing more and more inside work. Like today, I've got these 2 bedrooms to paint, and I've got a number of rooms in my own house to paint as well. So I've decided to upgrade to something a little bit better. This is a Wagner 250M, which is quite a classic airless paint sprayer. I bought it from Amazon, which is about the cheapest that I could find amongst all the sort of standard DIY outlets. I'll put a link to the Amazon page in the description below. So what's the difference between HVLP and airless? Well, this is an HVLP sprayer. And essentially the way it works is a whole load of air gets thrown through this nozzle, and then due to a Venturi effect in here, paint gets sucked up. There should be a bit of a pipe there. Paint gets sucked up between the reservoir, it gets pulled into the nozzle and chucked out with all the air. And that means you've got a really big mixture of air and paint, so it can be a bit sort of spluttery. For fences and things like that, I think it's absolutely great. It works really well. Now, airless works in a different way. Essentially, there's no air going through the pipe. Paint is pumped out, just like water coming through a hose. And as long as you've got a decent nozzle and you know how to use it, you can get a really fine finish that's quite accurate as well. It's great for doing indoor work, and that's why I've upgraded, because of what I've got to do now. Right, enough about that. We'll be coming back to that a little bit later. Now, one of the main things about spray painting in a house is masking up. This is going to take you more time than actually doing the painting. So everywhere that I don't want to paint, like around windows and carpet I'd rather not paint as well, needs to be covered and masked up. So before we get this out of the box and start trying to use this, let's go around and do a little bit of masking up. If you have ever spray painted anything, even just out of an aerosol can, you'll know an important part of the process is stopping the paint going to places that you don't want it to. And as the actual painting part of this job is so quick, covering and masking items you don't want to paint takes the longest time and needs to be done properly. Here I'm using pre-taped masking film to cover the windows, doors and skirting. This comes in different lengths, and later you'll see me use some of the larger film in places that I don't necessarily need to, just because I ran out of the shorter version. All the tools and materials I'm using here you can find in the paint spraying section of my Amazon storefront, link here and in the description below. I'm using standard masking tape to secure the masking film in place. No frog tape needed today, as I don't have any particularly crisp edges I need to produce. If you don't know why frog tape is the best to produce crisp edges, then have a look at my video of a couple of weeks ago where I explain it all. Around this radiator, I don't have to be too accurate, as it's normally got a radiator box around it that I've already taken away. So as long as I'm no more than 2 or 3 inches away from it, the box, when it comes back, will cover this joint. So this pre-taped plastic dust sheet thing that you've just seen me using, I think it's really good and really handy for masking large areas, but it's not perfect. And just a couple of tips with this. Although it's masking tape, it's really, really thin. And when you're putting it on the wall, just imagine if I'm painting this rail and I want to mask this wall. When you're putting it on, it's quite difficult to get it absolutely straight. The masking tape is really thin, and it sort of bends in a different angle to the paper underneath it. So it's quite difficult to get a really straight edge. Also, it's not very sticky. When you pull the plastic down, it tends to just rip off. And just another little tip, to cut it, I like to use these sort of box cutters, which makes it really easy to just go all the way through rather than trying to fiddle with a pair of scissors. So it's not that tacky. So when you do pull the plastic down, there's that chance it comes off. And if it's going to come off so easily, when you're firing spray paint at it, there is that chance that it's going to go underneath. So the alternative to putting it exactly where you want is come away maybe 10 mil, half an inch. Makes life easier because you don't have to be super exact. And then with some decent masking tape, mask exactly where you want, which does a better job of masking up, and it reinforces this as well. And then you can pull out your plastic without any threat of the thing coming off the wall. But more importantly, when you're actually painting, the last thing you want to do is to find that your masking tape has suddenly come away because you're firing your spray paint at it. So now there's no way anything's going to go underneath that. So the only drawback to that is that you will use more masking tape. But if you're going to do a job like this, work out how much tape you need and then double it, because you're going to get through lots of this, and it's just a part of doing the job. Before painting, I obviously take the opportunity to fill any cracks around the two rooms and to repair any holes and remove this curtain rail that just shouldn't be here. And a little tip for you, if you've got a raw plug in a plasterboard wall that you want to remove and fill the hole, rather than pulling it out, that normally brings plaster and everything else with it that makes the hole even bigger, then lightly pop in a screw, then with a hammer, I don't have one with me today, tap it into the wall rather than out. This means that you're left with a very neat small hole to repair. So another little tip when you're masking up, the tips are all about masking, but this is like 90% of the job. When you're painting around sockets, by definition, they need to be slightly away from the wall so you can paint just behind them. Even if they're just a few millimeters, that is fine. But you do need to mask them, else obviously they get covered in paint. So this is my top 10 tip on how to mask a socket really quickly and really easily. The first thing you have to do is don't undo the screws. So with it still tight up against the wall, I put my masking tape up against the wall, and that means I get a nice tight exact line without any stress, and all I have to do is keep going around and do the same. Now I undo the screws and loosen the thing. The second trick is to have a pre-cut piece of paper that you've cut a strip of about the height of sockets and switches, and then all you need to do is pop that in there and use the masking tape, secure it in, and that is another socket done. Next. With the skirting covered, I can use this disposable plastic sheet to cover the new carpet. FYI, these plastic disposable sheets are so thin that once you've successfully unfolded it fully, you're left with what feels like just a few microns of polythene that will just blow away if you sneezed near it. Because of this, I also put down some additional protection before I started spraying. So after quite a lot of masking up and putting down polythene and all kinds of layers, I think I'm ready for painting. I've masked up all the way along the bottom of the wall here, and I've got like a absorbent sheeting here as well. I'm a little bit worried about any paint going underneath that onto the new carpet, but I've done the best I've can. I've got 2 layers of polythene and an absorbent sheet. And that's one subtle difference, I think, between putting some sheeting down for standard painting and masking up and putting sheeting down for spray painting, because as I spray next to that sheet, potentially it's going to find its way through any nooks and crannies onto the carpet. Whereas normal painting, if you get a drip, it's normally vertical onto your sheet. So I've had to make sure that nothing's going to get through there, especially when I spray paint that bottom section. Working away from home does mean that you inevitably at some point forget to take something with you. This time it was my paint stirrer, but in one of the wardrobes I did find an old coat hanger, so a DIY solution was the best that I could do. It's really important to give the paint a good mix before spraying, as emulsion has a tendency to settle and the sprayer sucks up the paint from the bottom of the tub, so if it's too thick it's just not going to work. With these types of machines, they need priming before you spray, so both tubes go into the paint. With the sprayer set to prime, the paint is sucked up by the feed pipe, goes through all the machinery inside the sprayer, and is returned to the paint tub through the smaller return pipe. Once this is done, the sprayer is now primed, which means I can turn the knob on the side, which will then feed paint to the hose and the nozzle. It takes a few seconds for the paint to find its way all the way through the hose, but eventually it comes out and I can turn the spray tip to spray. Spoiler alert, spraying inside produces a really fine cloud of airborne paint. So using a respirator with the right filters, not just a cheap dust mask, is essential to make sure that doesn't get in your lungs. I start spraying some trial strips and immediately see a clean stripe either side of the main run, which means that the paint is a little too thick, so I dilute it off camera. I keep spraying to get that diluted paint all the way through the hose. This takes a bit and does mean that the brown coloured feature wall that I'm painting white here does turn into a bit of a trial panel. But it needs 2 or 3 coats anyway, so I'll come back to it a little bit later. The main technique to spraying is to always have the nozzle moving when the paint is coming out, and to be about 250mm or 10 inches away from the surface you're spraying. Each run should overlap by around 30–40%. And once the diluted paint had finally found its way through to my nozzle, the paint coverage was a lot more even, so I could get on with the job. The painting itself goes really quick, and I did 2 coats in the first room before moving on to the next, being careful not to drip any paint along the way. You'll notice here that I'm using a 300mm extension nozzle on the gun that I bought from Amazon, which means with standard height ceilings, you can spray them without having to stand on anything, which makes life a lot easier. Another tip here is when painting inside, it's handy to have a set of cheap sight type lights to show you where you've covered, especially when painting white on white or doing a second coat. Painting like this, as it's so fast, is only really worth it if you've got quite a bit to do. Because of the risk of paint getting on the carpet or furniture, this is a perfect solution if you're painting an empty house or a new extension or garden room, somewhere where overspray won't cause you a problem. The painting is quite a quick process, so it doesn't take long before I'm finished, so it's time to clean the paint sprayer. I start by putting the feed pipe into clean water, and then purging the paint that's in the machine and the hose back into the pot of paint where it came from until I see water coming through. I then shoot the rest of it to waste until the water runs clear. It doesn't matter which type of paint sprayer you use, cleaning it properly is so important if you expect it to work the next time it comes out the box. And if you're using emulsion like I am here, water is your best friend and you'll need plenty of it to make sure all the paint is removed. Everything gets taken apart and cleaned, including the filter in the gun and all the components around the tip. I found it's easier to do this if your wife is out shopping, so you've got a chance to clean up the kitchen sink before she sees what a mess you've made. So with the paint sprayer completely washed up and all the paint, including anything in the nozzle, completely cleaned out, I can now go around and take off all the masking tape from both rooms, which is always a very satisfying job. And I'm sure it's very difficult to see, especially because it's white, the finish on the wall. But I must say, it's far better than a roller or a brush. Spraying paint always gives a really nice, clean finish with no brush marks or roller marks. So that's just about me finished. Everything's packed up. I do need to get some stuff in the car. I'm a little bit later than I wanted to be, but it's a good job done. The only thing I would say is now the walls are really nice and bright and clean. When I look at the skirting, I could do with a bit of a coat of paint, so maybe that's going to have to be next time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, have a look at our Patreon page and my Amazon storefront. I will see you next time.